Look what's back. Yep, this is the same F450 that I did the engine swap on. I put a 7.3 test engine to test the CNG system, and the truck is now back from testing. I drove it back yesterday from Detroit, Michigan, and now that the testing is complete, I will be removing the CNG system off completely and putting the truck back to stock, and eventually swap the original engine back into it. But I'm not gonna record that because who wants to see an engine go in and out? Exactly the same engine pretty much. I already did that once. But I will show you how the CNG system works and the removal process, or some of it. What I can show, I'll show it. But this is a double tank system. I think the front tank is like a 24 by 60 or 26 by 60, and then that's a 18 by 60. It's a pretty good system because I was getting like around 350 miles in one fill up, which is nice. So the truck right now is dedicated, only runs on natural gas, and I have about 800 psi left in the tanks, so I will have to drain it before I remove the tanks, which is not bad because 800 psi is not that much, but definitely want to drain it before removing the tanks. So let's take it to the shop and start removing things. So I'm going to remove this cover here and hook it up to the drain station. So I've got the cover removed. This is a double tank assembly here. So each tank has its own valve, and they are electronic and manual valves. So when you open the door, it activates the solenoids, because you have the wiring going to both solenoids. And it's kind of like a fuel pump, because when you open the door or turn the ignition on, it primes it and starts, instead of pumping like a regular pump, like gasoline pump, it just opens it up, and there's pressure inside the tank, and it just pushes it into the lines, you know, goes through the filter into the regulator here. So these tanks, they hold up to 3600 psi. That's a lot of pressure, and it sounds dangerous, but it's actually not, because there's a bunch of safety features that come along. For example, if you have a huge leak here, the valve will shut off on its own. If you get into an accident and your airbags blow up, the valves will shut off, so there won't be any natural gas leaking out. If there's a fire, if this truck catches fire, this tank starts getting hot, the pressure starts going up. If it reaches 5000 psi, there's a PRD, pressure relief device here, that it will just shoot the pressure out of the tank so it doesn't blow up. And at that high pressure, even if there's an open flame here, it will not ignite. It has to be compressed. So it's a safe system. And so once again, when you come to a fill up, you fill these tanks up to 3600 psi to full. Then when you start the truck, these valves open up, the CNG starts flowing through the filter, which filters need to be replaced every 10,000 miles or so, depending on your fill up station. Basically, it's not like dirt or anything that gets in there, there's just oil. Some older stations, they have a lot of oil coming through the lines and stuff, so the oil gets caught here, and there's a filter there. Recommended to replace every 10,000 miles. So the CNG is flowing. It's still at 3600 psi here, and it goes down to the regulator. Now this regulator here on this car is 100 psi, so it turns down the pressure from 3600 psi to 100 psi, and then that line goes underneath the vehicle with the OEM fuel lines and ends up at the rail here. One more thing I forgot to mention is this is a high pressure sensor. This basically reads the pressure, the tank pressure, and operates this gauge here, which is there's different types of gauges. This is one we use for testing and stuff that shows the actual PSI, and right now I think there is a little bit less than 800 PSI here in both tanks, so it shouldn't take long to drain. If these tanks were both full, it could probably take up to like 3-4 hours to drain. Reason being is when you drain CNG, especially fast, it freezes up. It freezes up the valves, and you know, it just won't flow properly. Like there's gonna be like ice on these lines here. This is also a high pressure line. It just connects to this tank here, and another high pressure line that connects to the fill. This is the fill up. This was a custom package, and it was only designed for testing purposes only, but as you can see that all the high pressure is in the back of the vehicle, and past the regulator it turns down to 100 psi. On some vehicles it's less, and some it's more, but this is a 7.3 V8, so it needs 100 psi to run. If that pressure drops to, you know, below 80 psi at the rail, the truck will most likely turn off and it will not run until you refill it. This one only runs on natural gas, by the way. And as you can see, there's some coolant lines here that connect to the regulator. Reason for that is, like I was saying, when you drain CNG, you know, the lines will freeze up. So these coolant lines, they're connected, and there's always hot coolant running through the regulator, and it stays hot. Therefore the lines will not freeze, and you always have good flowing pressure to the rail. Now on a dedicated like this one here, what happens is the gasoline injectors get replaced with Bosch natural gas injectors, all 8 of them. So at this point, so this is a high pressure sensor, and there's also a low pressure sensor under the hood right here. So that sensor reads rail pressure, and if it reads anything, you know, below say 80 psi, the vehicle will not run. Well, if this is a dedicated, but if this was a bi-fuel, it would just automatically switch over to gasoline on its own. But this being a dedicated, if you're not reading proper pressure at the rail, then the vehicle will just shut off, and until you refill it or fix the problem, it will not run again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drain these tanks one at a time, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect it from the vehicle. Actually, the best thing to do is, right now there's CNG in all the lines, so what I like to do is just start the vehicle, and while it's running, close the valves by hand. Make sure it's completely closed. Close both of them. The vehicle will shut off on its own because we'll just cut the fuel supply. So it'll run, and then once the pressure drops in the lines, it will shut off on its own. Should be any second now. There it goes. So at this point, you don't have, well, you still might have a few PSI in the lines, but you know, it's not high pressure anymore. So right now what you want to do is crack the low pressure fuel line open, and that'll release any kind of pressure in your lines, and it's safe to work on at that point. So let's get started. So all I have to do is just crack this line here. I can do it. There it goes. As you can see, there's no pressure in there anymore. And all these connections are O-ring face seal, so you can just pretty much hand tighten it and it won't leak. So there you go. Alright, so I'm gonna remove this hose, the crossover hose that connects both both tanks together, and drain one tank at a time. And in the meantime, while it's draining, I'm going to go ahead and get under the hood and replace the natural gas injectors with the original gasoline injectors. So let's get started. So once I give this solenoid power, basically all I have is it's a 12-volt connector that I have from the inside of the shop, and when I plug it in, you can hear it click, activated the solenoid. So the valve is still manually closed, so what I'll do is I'll slowly open it, and you can see that it fills up this red line high pressure hose that's connected to that vent. So I'm going to open it all the way. Always do a little turn back so it doesn't get stuck open. And if we go over here, I am showing, you know, about 700 psi. So I'm going to slowly open this valve here. And you can hear the CNG draining. There's also a ground wire that I have connected. So, alright, while that's draining, I'm gonna hop under the hood and put the gasoline injectors back in. So I've got the original injectors back in it for gasoline, and the second tank is being drained right now. Maybe another 20 minutes or so it will be completely empty. So at that point I'm going to pull it inside, take the cover off all the way, and remove these tanks and remove the lines underneath. One thing I forgot to mention as far as safety goes, with natural gas, every vehicle has a manual shut-off, being a quarter turn that is located on the driver's side. And if for any reason, or for service or any reason, you need to shut that off, you just reach under there with a stick or with a hand or whatever and close it. It's very easy to do. So if you were to do some maintenance work under the hood, you don't really have to disable anything in the back. You just close this valve here, and then you have no pressure. so that's kind of convenient, and it's a safety thing as well. So all right, well, let's wait until this drains and then I can pull it inside and keep working on it. So the F450 system, dedicated natural gas system, has been completely removed. The tanks have been removed, all the lines, everything's been removed. Everything's been put to stock, and it still needs to be reprogrammed, but this may be the last time we're working on this truck, because I'm not sure what will happen to it. It might be the end of its life, or they may get something else modified in the future, maybe even a Whipple supercharger, just to test it out. Yeah, I guess stay tuned for the next video and see what happens later.